What do we learn about love through cancer journeys and psychedelic journeys? And what if the search for meaning itself becomes a burden that prevents us from simply being present? In today's podcast, we're speaking with Ryan Meeks. Ryan is the author of Life is a Gift, Love is the Point. He spent 16 years as a megachurch pastor in Seattle before his 2017 Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis accelerated his departure from Christianity and opened him to psychedelic medicines. He now provides psychedelic guidance, spiritual direction, and personal coaching at Nautilus Integration. Ryan brings pastoral presence, cancer survival, and psychedelic wisdom to understanding embodied healing. In this episode, Ryan and I explore cancer's purifying fire and how psychedelics can sometimes deliver what religion often promises but doesn't always provide. We discuss the difference between superficial love and embodied compassion, and the paradox of seeking meaning when life is already sufficient. Ryan describes how his pastoral training prepared him to hold intense experiences, but he required unlearning the impulse to provide answers within the midst of that intensity. Ryan reminds us that love must be a verb and an action, not just a feeling or an emotion. He also emphasizes that the experience of life and love is enough, and that our efforts to impose meaning onto those experiences can just be a distraction. This podcast is brought to you by Healing Cancer Journeys. You can find us online at www.healingcancerjourneys.org and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Substack at Healing Cancer Journeys. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as legal or medical advice. I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Ryan Meeks. Ryan Meeks, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much.
Well, thank you for being here. So, Ryan, we'll talk about your experiences at the intersection of cancer and psychedelics and spirituality. And I want to start with that third dimension of spirituality and talk about your spiritual arc, the evolution of your spirituality throughout your life. And for many years, you were a Christian pastor. And I'd love to understand how you got set on that spiritual path. What was that initial animating spark or that vocation that led you into being a pastor?
Yeah, well, it really starts with inherited faith. I was raised as a Christian. My father was a minister. I grew up in church more than in my own home. We were there all the time. And, I had predominantly incredibly positive experience. The church was a place of meaning and belonging and community and care. And then, ontologically or, metaphysically, we had answers for all the big things. So there was a sense of continuity to the human experience, to time, to purpose. And so, there's a lot of comfort that came from that. And it gave us language for why life was about more than just the individual. And so lots of positive stuff. But also at the same time, growing up, especially around junior high, and as I was sort of, I guess in some ways, stumbling into a season of my own critical thinking, I was bumping up against the limitations of inherited faith and my own deep desire to be in alignment with what was true in me. And all around me were these people claiming these incredible experiences of transcendent God interactions, let's say, because the brand of sort of evangelical Christianity I grew up in is more on the Pentecostal side, which is much more of a expressive, we believed that Jesus was present and alive and here and now, and we could access and feel and interact with and call upon the healing power of this God through Jesus. And so, but I wasn't feeling that. In my own honest space inside my head, I was sort of gaslighting myself. I learned, to gaslight myself. Maybe I'm the problem. It must be some hidden sin because I wasn't hearing from God. I wasn't feeling this, what in my tradition, everyone was saying they had a personal relationship with Jesus. And I was like, I don't know that I've met the guy. I have heard a lot. And so I learned to pretend, I learned to fake it to make it, not in there was a deep earnestness in me that was okay, there's something beautiful about faithfulness, even when I don't feel it. It's not just all about me having ooey gooey feelings, I can be good and virtuous and faithful even with the gap that I feel. But ultimately, as I talk about in the book, that eventually wore down over many years.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that. You're no longer a pastor.
Right.
I
Yeah.
understand that you no longer identify as a Christian. How did that evolution occur? Was that a bunch of little things building up over time? Was there a single kind
Yeah.
of catastrophic event? What
Yeah,
was
I
the
would
arc of this
say
evolution?
all of the above. One of my friends, Bart Campolo, says his faith died the death of 1,000 paper cuts, and I relate to that. And I would
Yeah.
also say not only is it true that it's a bunch of little things, but also a series of like shattering experiences, and whether they were cross-cultural experiences in the Congo or Southeast Asia or Ethiopia, like involved with some relief organizations that did incredible work. It wasn't missionary work; it was all just service and relief. Though animated, at least for me, by my love for Jesus and what I understood to be the way of compassion through Christianity, through the Christian lens. But I met wonderful, beautiful human beings of, various backgrounds, Buddhist and Hindu and atheist and all the rest, right? And different cultures that didn't see the world remotely the way, my Western California, Washington, Oregon, I'm a West Coast guy all the way up and down many times. And it confronted the love and compassion and connection I had with others who were so different than me. It was confronting to a narrative that I'd inherited that people needed to convert to our framework. And it just felt so untrue to me. I would meet these people and like, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful refraction of the infinite complexity of reality. And there's so much beauty and love and all the good things that I thought were central to what made Jesus beautiful to me were present with them, right? Love, joy, and peace, patience, kindness. That was there. So anyway, so stuff like that, there were sort of these existential heavy moments where we were spreading my grandfather's ashes, and that was just one of those spaces where the veil felt really thin. Like, I'm going to be here for a few short decades. What am I doing with my life? I don't know any of the things that I'm supposed to know. And thankfully, I had started a church at the ripe age of 25. and and I think it grew really fast, partly because I would always tell people, like, hey, I don't know if any of this is the absolute truth. How could I know that? Like, I was born in 1978 in Eugene, Oregon. Like, I am here saying this makes sense to me, to love your neighbor as yourself. That feels like that's the only way that we're going to get along here together on this rock floating in the middle of nowhere. And so I don't know, but I'm going with this because I know I can't be my best on my own. And I need a path and a practice to cultivate a sense of self-transcendence that leads me to compassion. And this is the path I know best. So I think early on people were like, oh, it's so humble or whatever, which I wasn't trying to be humble. I was just saying, like, hey, just so you know, I don't know. And as soon as I have a better bet, or something that makes more sense to me, I'll go with that. And I learned later, as, when I started to really deconstruct, that people didn't believe me because they were pretty mad when I started saying, hey, I think actually, we don't need the religious scaffolding to arrive at compassion. Like, compassion and beauty and transcendence and reverence and awe and wonder, all of those things can exist outside of dogmatic, religious belief structures. And that upset at least a few folks, a few thousand folks anyway.
And it's interesting, just the humility in what you were preaching. I mean, preaching all those beautiful things and also saying, like, we don't really know. And
Mm-hmm.
just being grounded in that humility is really interesting. I'm curious where you are today with your spirituality. Like, how do you self-identify, or what are your beliefs or practices? I don't want to put you in a box, but I'm curious where you are today.
Yeah, me too. I wake up every day curious. The categories and labels that we use, they have a purpose and a function at some level, and then also they get really in the way. So I would have to say, like, I don't have a bunch of supernatural beliefs. What I have is values and convictions that, is the whole point, that, like, at the end of the day, did I give all the love that I had to give? That's the success of a life. And then the other one, and this is kind of how my book ended up becoming titled what it is, but it's just these two things of, like, wow, this is amazing. And as far as I can tell, I just woke up in the middle of this gift, this incredible, holy, miraculous experience of being a human being. And so it's a gift. And so that's the, sort of this movement of gratitude. That's the first belief I suppose I have of my, if it is spirituality at all. And then the second being love is the point, as I said. So it's just this gratitude and then embodied love, like the response to the awareness of gratitude. Life is a gift, love is the point, and it just sort of, they feed one another just sort of back and forth. Besides that, I kind of feel like everything else is just sort of a fun discussion. Like, whether you're talking about God, whatever that means, or aliens, I don't think it's like a conversation that should be off limits or anything, but I just don't have any hard conviction because I don't know. And I'm not really sure how one would know. We can fall into some sort of long-winded discussion about epistemology, but my conviction is that that can be a fun sideshow, but it's not primary, because I think people can live a beautiful human life who, have Down syndrome or, some sort of mental struggle in their life, whatever it is, even mental health, or maybe even just who haven't graduated high school. Like, you don't have to be able to parse out the finer points of a theological worldview to have a beautiful human life. So that's neat, but it has to be primary. It has to be behavior, values, like what am I putting into the world through love? And it doesn't take a lot of, religious structural framework to do that. You can do that through religion. I'm not anti-religion. I think religion can be and should be in its best form a galvanizing container for human cultures to thrive. That's sadly not always the case. So anytime it goes into coercive power where everyone must believe this or we're the only right ones, then we get into some dangerous territory. But for me now, I'm thankful to be here. I don't know if we do this once or infinitely. Either way, I'm here now, this time or this one time. And I want to make the most of it through loving as best I can.
What I hear you saying is even without formal religion, you're still very grounded in love and gratitude. And I also hear you talking about awe and wonder and the gift of not knowing. And that can sometimes be somewhat paradoxical, but you, despite not having the container of formal religion, you're still very anchored and grounded. I'm also curious about your cancer journey. So in the arc of your spiritual journey, you were also diagnosed with cancer in 2017.
Yep.
Hodgkin's lymphoma. Tell us a little bit about the cancer journey and how your cancer journey shaped your broader spiritual arc.
Yeah, I was definitely in, I think I started my primary, as I say, I fell out of the tree of Christianity and hit every branch on the way down. I started somewhere around 2010 or so, and for a few years, that was pretty private. I was like, oh no. Like, I'm way past, I don't know if this is true. Now I'm like, a lot of this is not only untrue, but dangerous. And I need to sort of dismantle the bomb that this book, this library of books, frankly, is the words of God, because there's real horrid violence and genocide and all this other garbage which led to us making a formal statement for full inclusion of our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters. But we had gone through like a lot, because instead of leaving the church, I just started saying it publicly, which caused certainly a rupture and a lot of publicity and frustration from the broader evangelical world that I was a part of. And a couple years into like hemorrhaging people and money, and we had 8 locations at one time, and we consolidated down to 1. And we'd been doing that for about a year and a half. And that's when in 2017, I had this cold that wouldn't go away. And my doctor was like, we got to do a scan. And I was like, I'm fine, just give me some antibiotics again. And she like kind of got in my face about it, like, we need to check this. And it came back, it's in my lymph nodes. There was a big, large mass right around my heart and lungs and spine. And I just remember I was so tired by that time with the years of trying to help people see what to me was a beautiful liberation from the stranglehold of fundamentalist Christianity. Like, we don't know. We don't have to know. We can love for no reason. We can love for love itself. That's a reason enough. And I was so excited to share this, knowing that this could be difficult, but also naively thinking I could show people evidence and reason, and that they would too walk into it. And certainly many did, but most left pretty upset. And that was a grief for me. I wasn't trying to be edgy, and there was a lot of, personal pain and betrayal that went along with that. But I think by the time I got the cancer diagnosis, I was so tired of arguing about the Bible, and sort of have everyone wanted to meet with me and yell at me about how I'm leading people to hell now because I'm a new age heretic or something, that it was a relief. I remember thinking, as soon as I got the diagnosis, the first thought shocked me because there was no filter. Just inside my head, I was like, oh, thank God. And I was like, whoa, I'm like that done. Like, I'm like, good. Now I can quit this job and people will understand. Like, I can't keep doing this shit. So it ended up becoming like a really important part of a pivot in my life, just at a personal level, and then whatever my spirituality is, because I took a step back. I focused on my healing. I let the church run without me for a year. I did chemotherapy and just, walking on the river and trying to rest. It was just this long, sort of almost quasi-silent retreat that I went on that was, the temple of my body. And learned in a lot of ways that I had been pretty disembodied, living in my head. First thinking that, the path to God was about right theology, mental, intellectual. I had to believe certain things perhaps happened in the past. And then to deconstruct that was a mental process as well. So much of my living was done in the head. And cancer was like, fucking come here. And it pulled me into my body. I had to, get nauseous with chemotherapy, and I lost so much weight, and I've always been a thin guy, but whoa, I was a skeleton walking around, and I could see it in people's eyes, the pity and the fear of being reminded of their own mortality. But it was also really freeing because in the face of like, hey, I think I'm going to be okay, but also I could die. Like, people kind of get better and then get it worse and die. I've watched it. We lost our sister-in-law to colon cancer just this past year. We thought it was over. She had gone through it and we were done, we thought. So I was very aware, but that awareness, that gift, that, companionship, the dance I was doing with death, it was like a refining fire, I'd say. It was like a massive threshing floor that clarified, okay, this doesn't matter. Yep. Right? Like, I don't care about this anymore. I'm not even mad about it. It's just like, I don't care. Yeah. And that sort of clearing the floor of what I needed to put my energy into, and how much of my life, especially becoming a minister and trying to care for people, had also been a little bit of a self-abandonment and always trying to take care of everyone else versus like being able to be like, dude, just listen here and be able to stand alone if you have to, and then just trust yourself. Like, all of those kind of lessons came and just finished during the cancer season, so that by the time I was cleared at the end of that year, I just had crossed a Rubicon of sorts. I was like, I'm not doing any of those things anymore. This is where I'm at. I don't make an apology for that. And I'm comfortable with things that I'm done trying to make other people comfortable with, which uncertainty scares people. But I was very comfortable by that point. Like, I don't know. I could die, and I don't know what God is or if God is. And that's okay.
So I have said to friends that my cancer was a purifying fire that burned away the bullshit.
Yeah.
And it just provides a certain amount of clarification, and it burns away all of the other unnecessary stuff in life. And that burning hurts. I mean,
oh God. Yeah, I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
But it's there are some upsides to it. I'm also curious.
No doubt.
You were still you talked about falling out of the Christian tree and kind of hitting every branch on the way down. As you were going through your cancer journey, to what extent was your Christian faith helpful, harmful, neutral? Like, a lot of people turn to faith as part of the cancer journey.
Totally. And oh my God, I would never want to rip that from anyone. If you're listening and you're a committed Christian and you're going through cancer right now, whatever I say next, I just hope you know, like, if your faith is providing comfort, the last thing I want to do is rip that away. What I'm talking about is just my own experience, not my take on absolute reality. By the time I had cancer, I was so far outside of my Christian faith, there was nothing left of it, except the parts that I think that are pan-cultural, right? Like love, joy, and peace, patience, kindness, long suffering, like all of the beautiful values of pretty much any decent human meaning system, regardless of its roots. So yeah, maybe the answer there is, what help was it? Well, the community of friends that were around me was an incredible support and very important, but it's also very small. Like, it culled my community to the ones who are willing to be reminded of their own death on the regular, trying to be around that. That's a heavy energy to be around, supporting our family. And then I don't know that much of my Christianity was the most helpful. It was the love of my wife and the miracle of looking into my kids' eyes and holding their hands and cuddling them while I could, no matter how this ended. Those things got me through, because I wasn't like, oh my gosh, when I get healed, I'll do this. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to wait to live. How do I want to die? Saying thank you to everyone I got to love. Thank you for letting me love you. And if that's how I want to die, then that's how I should live. I should do that now. Just thank you, I love you. Thank you, I love you, to everyone. So it was a real, like you said, it sort of shoved my face to the front, right? Like an Aztec sacrifice on the front. I'm just out there like, we're just bare and raw, and life is touching me with no defense.
And death, because it's a face-to-face with your own mortality, and
yes, absolutely,
it's life and death all at once. And but it's interesting to hear you talk about your Christian faith. I'll share. So I was diagnosed initially in 2004.
Okay.
And at that time, I remember my oncologist, she said, find your angels. And I did. I leaned really heavily into my faith. So I was Catholic at the time, and very, very, very helpful. Relapse. I had a significant relapse in about 2018. And in that relapse, I found Christianity to be unhelpful, harmful to an extent of there's a lot of guilt, and did I do something wrong? Did I not say the right prayer? Did I not have
Sure, yeah.
And I just shoved it away, and so I feel like I have lived both sides of that journey, and where spirituality can sometimes, or religion can be helpful, sometimes it can be harmful.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point. The whole people, your faith will heal you, and so now you have to be like, am I faithful enough, or is God good? Yeah, all that whole psychological ransom of believing yourself healed is oof, that's dark for sure. And as a pastor, of course, I saw people torture themselves with that all the time. I've sat in too many ERs. Well, people's kids got taken off life support who thought, I thought we prayed enough, and then now the question of God's character, why does a God need to be convinced by more prayer to save my kid? And do I not have enough value intrinsically? Do they not? Why doesn't this fit God's plan that my kids survive? Again, I didn't have those conflicts when I was going through it, just because I had put those away. I'm like, I don't believe that any more than I'm stressed out about the Polynesian god Lono, doing something negative to me. I don't lose sleep over those things because I don't believe them. But I have watched it hurt people for sure. Yeah.
One of the other kind of milestones in your spiritual evolution was psychedelics. So you came out of cancer treatments 2018, 2019, began using psychedelics, and tell us a little bit about what drew you into psychedelics. What was your intention in some of those early psychedelic journeys?
Yeah, so I don't count what I did in high school, I think we were just goofing around.
We're all gonna, I think we all did high school. Yeah.
So having dismissed all that, at least, and I do want to say, some people have significant experiences in high school. I did not. I was just goofing off, and I didn't have the presence of self to really look in and go on that journey. So I would say I didn't start until, as you said, later, and even after cancer. I was actually trying to go I was trying to go do ayahuasca before I got diagnosed with cancer, and I had it scheduled to go, and they were like, chemotherapy inside your body, trying to do ayahuasca, that will punish you in ways you don't even want to imagine. So, and then I actually signed up for a Vision Quest, a 14-day thing in the desert with Animas Valley Institute, and I was so sick with chemo I had to cancel that. So there was all this pressure building, and it felt like life was just the journey is cancer. Yeah. And once that was done, I kind of felt like the gate opened at the rodeo and I was like, okay, fucker, here we go. I've been waiting to start because I'd been reading all this stuff on, the sort of global enterprise of altered states of consciousness that all cultures have, except for Western culture, Western industrialized culture, have always highly prized. And so I was interested in lots of stuff, Sundance and vision fasts and trance dance drumming and psychedelics. So one of my mentors, Bruce Sanguin, who has a wonderful book on psychedelics called Dismantled, who himself was a minister in Canada, he was like, it's time for you to go deep and get into this. And so I ended up going to Canada, just off Vancouver Island there, and did my first intentional adult high dose mushroom experience there. And the intention for me was, hey, I'm post-cancer, I'm post-religion, kind of pre-everything. I felt like, whoa, I just wiped the slate clean, and now before I didn't know anything, and now I'm like, I really know, I have to rebuild what is this and how shall I then live, The question was before me. And also I was wondering, like, do I need to leave? Is it time for me to exit pastoring? And, pretty quick, it was like, I don't know, 20 minutes into it, I looked up at him and I'm like, these mushrooms have given me everything religion promised me, but never delivered immediately. I'm like feeling this intense connection to the all, this sort of endless ocean of unconditional love flowing, I guess, through me and as me. I didn't even know the distinction mattered. And then, insights about my parents and myself and forgiveness for various relationships. And I was blown away. And as soon as that first one was over, and I knew, okay, this is going to be a huge part of whatever spirituality looks like to me moving forward, or even just self-inquiry or personal development, because of how effective and powerful it was. And so I spent the next 2 years, my wife and I both, because she went right after I did, we spent the next 2 years just like diving in, doing everything we could find. And I was like amassing a research library. That's so me, like, okay, I get a little overkill on everything, but it's just fascinated. Like, how far does this go? And I think early on, as I was approaching this, I was like, oh, I'm gonna meet God. Okay. Like, I'm gonna go to the back wall of the Truman Show and open the door and walk out. Like, and I learned real quick that I ain't ever touching the back wall. Like, it is infinite, dude. I remember I saw Chris Beisch. I don't know if you know who he is. He wrote LSD and the Mind of the Universe. He's a comparative religion philosopher, CIIS and other schools. Anyway, he did I can't even remember how many, 78 dose. We're talking 5 to 8 tabs of acid, high dose, over a 30-year period or whatever, and recorded everything. Anyway, his stories, after I read his thing, I'm like, if he's not, exiting the back door, I am never going to get there. And so it completely switched, If my initial intention was okay, religion couldn't do it, drugs are going to do it. And that cracked. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I need a different reason then. Why should I continue? And for me, it became the evidence of what flows in me and through me as a result of this. Am I more loving? Am I more present? I don't want to take these drugs to escape, which was part of the thing I didn't like about religion. Religion felt like an escapist strategy. This world's sort of JV and everybody do all this stuff so you can go to the real thing, later on after the. And I think there's a version of the psychedelic world that is about that. People are trying to get out of here or dream up some other reality they can spend most of their time thinking about. To me, the best use of psychedelics is something that drives you right back home, right back to where whatever divinity is in the material. It's in the everyday. And to the degree that this helps me love my neighbor as myself more, then this is a beautiful thing to keep doing. So I did that for about 2 years, and still a regular part of my life.
And it sounds like the psychedelic experience, and it sounds like multiple journeys over that time period, and it's something that you continue to do is bringing you back into your body. And as you think about your cancer experience, you described that very similarly. Your cancer experience forcing you back into your body. I'm curious how the psychedelic experience impacted your post-cancer journey. I mean, if we talk about being survivors, and I'm not a big fan of the word survivors, but that's the term of coming back into life and your body after cancer. What was the role of psychedelics in your survivorship?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think one of the main things was I could actually hear from my body.
Yeah.
Like I had spent my whole life, I don't know, very dissociated for a lot of reasons that I go into a little bit more in the book about purity culture and sex being, this really, the church is so like obsessed with sex, and then it's like also don't do it ever, basically. Like pick a lane, guys. Cancer pulled me into my body, and then psychedelics, I think you probably agree, many people have said this, but psychedelic might not be the best word. They're psychosomatic drugs. And so they're bringing you into your body. I think, with the exception of maybe ketamine, even though it can be psychedelic at higher doses, it's dissociative. It's a dissociative anesthetic. That's one of the safest medicines to use globally, even really bad hospitals around the world. So it's a wonderful medicine. But for the most part, psychedelics are very much embodied. And that was a huge part of me learning a new way to relate to my body, because I was like, oh, I'm getting messages. I never knew the body could talk to me. You know what I mean? And started, because I smoked cigarettes and drank tons of alcohol my whole life. And when things were really hard at the church, I was smoking so much weed just to downregulate from the stress. And as soon as they started doing psychedelics, it was like I haven't wanted to touch weed again. I just have zero interest. No judgment against it. I think weed can be, fun or great or whatever. But for me, it was just like I just completely lost the taste or interest whatsoever. I didn't like the distance it felt like it created. Whereas, LSD or some of my other favorite compounds like 5-MeO, DMT, they just wouldn't let me get away. And I wanted to be there. And so it kicked off my fitness journey and my health. I can't even believe how much effort and time I spend on how my micronutrients are doing in my body and whatever. So I know my body's very happy I went through this cancer and psychedelic journey, because it's getting so much attention that I never gave it.
It's so interesting that cancer has some blessings associated with it.
Yeah, it sure can.
So I think about this on a daily basis of where I would be and how things might be different, probably for the worse if it wasn't for cancer. So I think that's a good transition into what you're doing at Nautilus Integration. Tell us a little bit about Nautilus and the types of work that you're doing.
So we work at the intersection of, I guess, spirituality. I kind of call it unspiritual direction. So there's no sort of sectarianism about it, but we're looking at how do you build a meaningful life outside of the confines of fundamentalism. And then again, that can be even an atheist, which I actually would consider myself an atheist, because at least in the pure form of the word, atheist, non-theist. That doesn't clear the floor of whatever God could mean. But theism as grandpa, sky grandpa, that kind of thing is, I'm done with that. And I think you can build a beautiful worldview. In fact, we don't need to go into it here, but I have this real sort of punk rock theory about atheism being one of the most beautiful faiths on earth. You can hold it in a negative way, but I think you can hold it in a really beautiful way. It's kind of punk rock to be it's all meaningless, but I choose love anyway. Fuck you, universe. I'm going to love. You meaningless son of a bitch. I'm going to love anyway. That's so punk rock.
I get to choose to love. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. The universe doesn't care, but I do. So, that's so punk rock.
Yeah.
So we work at the intersection of sort of quasi-spirituality. How do we build a faith or a life that matters, a purpose? Health and fitness. That's primarily my wife's training and background, but I do help guys with that sometimes. And then we work with psychedelic integration, helping people either prepare for or integrate an experience either that they had, or if they want us to come and sit with them while they're doing whatever it is they're wanting to journey with. I always am really careful to say we don't sell psychedelic drugs, so I'm nobody's plug. But yeah, just if you've ever been to a music festival or whatever, they always have these very legal tents where people can sit with you if you're having a difficult experience. Not that we only sit with people who are having difficult experiences. In fact, most of the time they're overwhelmingly positive. But I think a little challenge can be really helpful as well. So yeah, let's see, did I say all those things? And then relationship mentoring. My wife and I have been together for 30 years. We have 4 kids, 2 grown and 2 teenagers still with us. And we've just realized that Yeah, we have a few things to offer. We have a beautiful relationship and have been through so much together, and so we help couples or individuals who are working through, all the joys and difficulties of partnership and child raising.
Congratulations, man. 30 years is that is tremendously impressive. So
It's a long
congratulations to
time.
you and your wife and your family. That's lovely. You,
Yeah,
you mentioned unspiritual direction, and I wanted to ask. And the way it's written on the website is in parentheses spiritual direction. Tell us a little
yeah,
bit about what unspiritual direction is and how it's different
sure.
from traditional spiritual direction.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar, spiritual direction for the most part comes from the Catholic tradition. I would say, I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is the Jesuit tradition specifically within Catholicism. And it's more about, maybe another way to say it would be spiritual companionship. So instead of someone telling you what to do or being the person who explains the scriptures to you in a Catholic setting, it would be the person who listens with you to your life and to what God in that tradition is doing or saying or walking you through. So unspiritual direction would just be that this is the non-sectarian, non-faith version of that. And so, like, for instance, life, to me, life can be a stand-in for that. What is life saying? Like, what is showing up in your life right now? And so it allows for the beauty of spiritual companionship or Catholic spiritual direction to take place with all the benefits without any of the lexicon of spiritual words and the dogma that I don't find is necessary for all the benefits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. And you also mentioned that you're doing psychedelic integration and sitting with folks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, your background as a pastor, as a cancer survivor, how do you bring those experiences into sitting with someone and being present with them during a journey
Mm-hmm.
or after a journey in the integration process?
Yeah, that's no one's ever asked that, and I would say that, like, pastoring was the best preparation for sitting with people that I could have ever done. Like, because I've been in so much intensity with people, I'm very comfortable with how chaotic and dark and painful sometimes these things can be. Like I said, I've been with people while they unplug their kids from life support, while they get wheeled out and mom collapses on the floor. Like, that is an energy that, not everyone wants to spend their days doing that as a vocation. Not to say that's the only experience you can have in psychedelics, but the intensity of euphoria, bliss, and then absolute I mean, I've felt the deepest sorrow that I could ever imagine in psychedelic space, where I feel like I'm being, like, ice cream scooped out of my bowels, like this ancient pain. And so, pastoring, being with people through joy and sorrow, and to be fair, like, nobody calls their pastor like, "Hey, I just want to let you know I'm having a great day." Like, people call the pastor when there's shit going down, when there's pain, when there's a cancer diagnosis, when there's a kid who got hit by a car. Yeah, in that way, it really prepared me to be able to bring loving presence without answers, which I think is important for psychedelic space holding. I think there's a real danger in the space with all this importing of a certain metaphysical belief structure sometimes that comes along with that. And I think that's dangerous. And I would say violent, actually. I think it's inappropriate to give people things that open them so deeply and then be suggesting a certain worldview or belief structure to those very vulnerable people. So yeah, was really helpful sort of training ground for all of that. And then just having been open to spiritual experience, even though, people would hear this interview and go like, he's not spiritual at all, but I'm open. Like, I am so open to I don't know. Here's what I think right now. Here's how I'm feeling. This is my sense of what's probably true. And then God could show up in my life in some miraculous way tomorrow, and I'd be like, fuck yeah, this is cool. Like, I'm in, like, I don't have the answer. And so being open to, I have people I sit with who meet with Jesus in their experience. Is that really happening? I don't even think that question matters. It's happening for them, and they're gonna have to, contend with, now what.
And that ability to sit in that space with complete openness for a challenging experience, a terrifying, challenging experience, or also a religious experience, whatever that is, but having that openness in the space, it sounds like you're able to do that beautifully, and that you're background as a pastor, and I think as a cancer survivor too, just brings a lot into that experience.
Yeah, I mean, having my wife there, and because we do it together, there's
Oh,
always
interesting.
her and I, so there's a masculine and a feminine presence always,
Mm.
which on the one hand it is, it's a balancing of energies, first of all, the polarity. And then for women, I think it's really important for that sense of safety. And I should even qualify that. It's actually amazing for men because the opportunity to be like, have their hand held or even be hugged in that experience, knowing that there's nothing funny going on, like men have such a weird relationship, especially heterosexual men have such a jacked up relationship to women. They don't know in most cases how to have or an experience tenderness or affection that doesn't immediately go to sexuality. And it's so beautiful, the kind of things I see happen between, our male clients when my wife just like holds their head or, like embraces them or whatever, and they can just relax. I'm here, nothing funny's going on. Just let her be sweet with you. My God, like beautiful stuff.
Yeah, and again, it's being embodied in a way that is healing, and in a non-sexual way, and just being sensual and embodied without being sexual.
Totally. Yeah. And that's why it's so important to talk about boundaries at the beginning and all that kind of stuff. Because sexual feelings can come up in psychedelics, as you know, and to shut that down or shame that or have not talked about it. And now they're all stressed out like, oh no, I'm having all these, I just orgasmed for 25 minutes, which can happen. You got to be able to create a container that's safe because that's another one of the areas that's, there's rife for abuse and boundary crossing in this space. And it happens far too often.
I'm also curious about your books. You mentioned your book a couple of times. So the title of the book, Life is a Gift, Love is a Point, and you've mentioned those ideas throughout the conversation. And I'm curious about some of the ideas that you bring up in the book, and I think they're really kind of captured in the title. But part of the title is Love is the Point, and you've referenced that. And that word love is so interesting. It's a word that I wrestle with a lot because on one hand, the experiences, some of those powerful experiences I've ever had in my life, love is the most accurate way to describe that experience. Mm-hmm. And also the word love gets so overused, and it gets so overused in a religious context. I mean, I can remember like sitting in the pews as a child and the priest talking about the love of God, the love of Jesus Christ, and I'm like, what are you even talking about? And so I'm curious what love means to you when you talk about love being the point, and why love is ultimately the point.
Yeah. I think compassion might be the fastest way to answer that question, embodied compassion. I'm not interested in the sort of hippy-dippy, new age, Encinitas version of we're all one. To me, an intellectual love is just, I'm not interested in it. I'm talking about embodied love. To me, I talk about it in the book, love was my wife holding the puke bucket during chemo and rubbing my balding head and telling me that I'm hers and that she loves me so much. Like, to me, that's love, not the false aspartame saccharin. It's all love, that kind of stuff. I actually, that was a part of my journey, was sort of bumping into, once I left, what I think is one of the good things about Christianity, which was like love was about doing something, it's like serving and caring about the poor and, all of the things that for some reason in the US it stops meaning all of a sudden, like visiting the prisoner and welcoming the stranger and all that stuff. New agey love was just, it was just that soft sort of like, we're a community for a day, and that's love, because we did a loving meditation together. And to me, I'm like, the only one I'm interested in is like, love that shows up, love that says, this kid I just brought into the world, I'm going to give my life to see them flourish. And I'm going to put myself now second to that and live a life of like daily self-sacrifice for the well-being of this child in my care, which takes a certain kind of boy to become to care for his child. And there's a lot of that missing. So the simplest answer is embodied compassion, something that you can look at.
And it's active. You talked about love as a verb, love as an action, love as things that you do, not just something that you feel. And also, you talked about love, there being a compassion and a level of self-sacrifice to the other in that act.
Yeah, love suffers for sure. I do believe that. Like, I think that's what, I mean, in the end, love will cost you everything because everyone you love will leave you or you will leave them. That's in the end, that's, you lose it all. And so it's a guarantee. It's a way of saying later on, I want to suffer so deeply. I want to grieve like to the bottom of my soul because that's the evidence of love, that I gave myself to this. And I want to say, I don't think it's not a feeling. I just think that it's more, you know what I mean? And that living a life of embodied compassion in action as a verb actually feeds the feeling. And so that they complement one another. I just want to make sure we don't get into, like you said, just the intellectual version of it.
The subtitle of your book is How I Lost My Faith, Killed My Church, Saved My Life, and Found My Soul. That is a lot of change.
Yeah.
Lost my faith, killed my church, saved my life, found my soul. And I'm curious, we've talked about cancer, we've talked about psychedelics, and to what extent did cancer and psychedelics drive all of that change? Could you envision yourself losing your faith, killing your church, saving your life, finding your soul without cancer, without psychedelics?
No, it was an essential part. I think of like that sort of classic hero's journey structure. The call came way before psychedelics and cancer. I had to leave home when I went on that sort of existential wandering and being like, I'm lost. I don't know if I believe this anymore. I'm at the top of my game, crushing it at this huge megachurch. Everyone's like, way to go, buddy. And I'm like, oh no, I don't believe it. So that came way before, but the guides I met along the way, cancer and psychedelics, were instrumental in me being able to, I don't want to say arrive, because I am still on this pilgrimage of my life, but
still on the journey.
I had to rediscover soul, and I didn't know how to do that once I left religion. In fact, early on, I didn't think that was possible. I didn't believe in it. My first journey, I remember getting like messages from the medicine about what my soul wanted, and I was laughing like, I don't believe in a soul. It was just like, it had no interest in my beliefs. It was just like, well, too bad. This is what your soul wants. So they had a huge impact on it, And I would say the paradoxical answer to the cancer one is that cancer is the part that saved my life. Like, it had to crush me so I could get back into alignment with what was real in me. I'd gotten too far off track of like staying with something that was no longer feeding me, wasn't serving my journey anymore. And I needed to get crushed in order to realign myself with that.
Yeah, getting crushed sucks, but also finding your soul is a good thing. So we've been talking about that intersection of cancer and psychedelics and spirituality. And as I think about the common thread in those three things, it's meaning making, right? With psychedelics, we talk about going on a journey and having integration to make meaning. With cancer, I think that's the journey of survivorship, is trying to make sense of what happened to us. With religion, I kind of think about religion as a social technology for meaning making, but they all seem to have kind of meaning making at their core, at least the meaning making process. And man, you have lived all three of these meaning making processes, meaning making catalysts. You've lived them intensely. What have you learned about the meaning making process?
Okay, let me take a breath here because I think that's an important question. Yeah, that's dicey. I'm going to try to really split hairs here semantically, but I think I've come to a point today where I would say, instead of getting a better answer for meaning, the freedom of not looking for it has been the most helpful. And I find that seeking the meaning of life is less satisfying than telling life what it means to me. And so I'd rather than trying to look outside here and dissect or excavate the meaning or even a primary meaning for myself, I want that to come from here. Like, I want to respond, I want to play offense with meaning and be like, I love you, life. Thank you. I love you to the sunset. And without feeling like I need to arrive somewhere, okay, this is the meaning, or this is the narrative story that I fit into. I don't know any of those things, but I know that you matter. And I know that when I kiss my kids goodnight, that I don't need, what am I looking for more than this? I don't need it. So in some sense, it's just been a simplification.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't need to scramble for the things I once needed to like build this big meaning structure for. Life is already enough the way it is. Like before we can even speak words into it, that's meaning. Like silently before reality, without a word, obliterated by meaning.
It's interesting that you say that. Sometimes I feel like the meaning making process, which was my question, and the human desire to find meaning can be a burden, right?
Totally.
It puts us into the universe of language and thought that can distract us from just being present in the here and now.
Yeah.
And it's something that I just personally wrestle with, of like, oh, it's got to mean something. I've got to figure out what my cancer journey means. But also that search for meaning, it can be a burden. It can.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that just with purpose, and vocation. They're like, oh, what's my purpose? And I think that at some level there's a little bit of capitalism in there, and we have to fucking monetize everything that we enjoy now, so we can make money off of everything. And the purpose, Alan Watts was like, hey, the purpose is to be alive. The purpose of life is to be alive. You know what I mean? And I think that when we really give ourselves permission to love ourselves, we won't put ourselves on a treadmill of trying to make or discover meaning for ourselves. We'll know that we are inherently valuable and meaningful because we belong to the broader body of life. And that meaning is cultivated when we give ourselves to a relationship with this thing we're part of, right? And if that leads us into like mutual responsibility and care, I think meaning arises there in that relationship between us and reality.
I love it. Appreciate that you had such a thoughtful response to the question, and now I too am just kind of reflecting. So, but no, beautiful answer. All right. Well, Ryan, that largely brings us to an end here. Last question. If there were two folks that you would recommend for a future Healing Cancer Journey podcast, who would you recommend having on the podcast? What could they add to the conversation?
Well, right, my buddy Jonah McKee, who worked with me at the church way back, for many, many years and through all the chaos, one of my dear friends and my favorite person to go backpacking in the North Cascades with, he had cancer right after me. And I would say more even intense. I can't remember exactly. I think it was a non-Hodgkin's. Anyway, amazing guy. He and I remember we went backpacking not long after we were both done with cancer, and we both commented to each other, I think you'll understand this. We were like, I miss it. Do you know what I mean? And he was like, yeah, the clarity, the laser clarity. I can get lost now again easily in the distractions and the wants and whatever. And there was a beautiful simplicity to it that he and I were talking about. So yeah, maybe.
Yes, thank you. And I am so happy that you have pointed to earlier in the conversation saying, oh, thank God it's cancer. Right? And, oh, I miss cancer. Because those emotions, those thoughts are present too. And they sound crazy, but they're so true.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Ryan Meeks, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Man. Yeah, nice to meet you.
And, pleasure to meet you. Thank you, Ryan.